Hello everyone, welcome to another Android beginner tutorial. In this tutorial we are going to build our first Android app, which is going to be a calculator app. So without further delay, let's start building our calculator app. To do that, I'm going to open a new project. I'm going to select new project and enter the application name as calculator, as this is our calculator app, and we can change the company domain to whatever we want, but notice that that is going to be the package name. So here it's going to be com.alexvijayaraj.calculator. I'm going to click next, and we're not going to worry about the minimum SDK. It is going to be API 819. Let's click next, and I want an empty activity to be created, so I'm going to click that and then select next. Let's leave the activity name and the layout name to be default, and let's click finish. And now Android Studio is going to build a new app for us. Let's run this app to see if it works fine. I'm going to use the emulator and then click run to see if the app runs fine. Our app works fine, so we can start developing our calculator app. Now before we start to develop the actual app, let's understand how the calculator app looks like and how it works. So I'm going to open the app that's in the emulator, the calculator app, and we could see we have numbers from 0 to 9, and we have the operators here starting from plus, minus, product, divide, and we also have a delete or the cancel button along with the equal to button and the decimal point button. And we have a text view in the top, or the area where everything gets displayed. And let's try to build this with this as a reference. So I'm going to go into the activity main, and I'm going to replace the constraint layout to be relative layout, as we don't want to use the constraint layout. We will be using the relative layout as we learned in the previous tutorials. And let's delete this line as we don't require them. And yes, the design works fine now. So I want the text to be 0 as default, as in a calculator app the first value that would be entered is 0, and I want that to be displayed. I'm going to change the width to match parent, and I'm going to give the gravity to be end. This is because we want the 0 to be entered at the end, and then as we add in values, the values will move towards the left. And let's give some margins. I'm going to give the margin top to be 50 dp so that we can have some space at the top, and I'm going to give the Android margin n to be 10 dp so that we can have some space at the end of the 0. So this is the text view that we just created. Now let's start creating buttons. So I'm going to place the buttons inside a linear layout so that it is easier for us to place the buttons, and I'm going to give the width to be match parent and then the height to be wrap content, as we want the width to take the entire width of the parent, and then we want the height to take the height of the contents. So I'm going to give an ID to the linear layout and call this LL1, which stands for linear layout 1. And we want to specify the orientation of the linear layout, which is horizontal. Let's place the linear layout below the text view, but we haven't created an ID for the text view, so we'll have to do that. And I'm going to call the text view as TV display, as it displays the output or the value that's being calculated. I'm going to say Android layout below TV display. I need a margin on top, so I'm going to give Android margin top 20 dp. So we have some space between the display and the linear layout. So let's start adding the contents to the linear layout. So I want a button inside the linear layout, and the button needs to be wrap content, and we do not align any width. I'm going to create a button called button cancel, which is similar to the delete button we saw. And let's make this display C, and I want the cancel text color to be red since we want a difference. So it's FFs and 0000. So that's the color red. And now you could see that the button is displayed and the text C is displayed and in red color. Let's create two more buttons, and I want this button to be wrap content as well. And let's add in the ID, and I'm going to call this button as button mod, as we're going to add in the mod operator here. Text that's going to be displayed in this button is going to be the mod operator, which is %, and it does not going to have any color. Let's create another button here, and I'm going to call this button divide, as I'm going to display the divide operator here, and that is going to be a /. So there's some space here. I do not want this space, so let's organize the layout better by creating a weight sum. I'm going to give the weight sum as 30, and let's add in layout weight as 10. We need to copy this to all the buttons, and once we do that, the buttons are now well organized. So I need to create another row which displays buttons 7, 8, 9 and then multiply. As you could see in the calculator app, we need to display this line 7, 8, 9, and then since we already displayed these two buttons, we need to display the multiplication. So let's display these 4 buttons here, and I'm going to just copy paste this linear layout at the bottom, and we need to change the IDs. So this is LL2 and this should be below LL1, and the weight sum needs to be 40 since there are going to be 4 buttons. This is going to be B7 and the text is going to be 7. This is going to be B8 and the text is going to be 8. The next button is going to be B9 and the text is going to be 9, and we need to create another button here which is going to be B multiply, and the text is going to be a multiplication symbol. And now if we see that 7, 8, 9 and X is displayed, but we forgot to remove the text color for 7, so 7 is displayed as red, but after we remove the text color, the texts are printed properly. Now I don't want the space between the rows to be 20, as we need some kind of difference, so I'm going to give it as 10, so now there's less space. And let's go back to the app and let's create this row 4, 5, 6, and let's add in the minus at the end. So to do that, let's copy paste the linear layout 2 at the end of the layout, and I'm going to replace this as linear layout 3, and then this is going to be below layout 2, and the text that is going to be printed is 4, 5, 6, so it's going to be B4 and the text is going to be 4, B5, text is going to be 5, B6 and the text is going to be 6, and this is going to be B minus, and the text that is going to be displayed is a minus symbol. So let's check the display, and as you could see 4, 5, 6 minus is displayed. And the next row is going to be 1, 2, 3 and then the plus. So I know it's easy to do this. We are just going to copy paste and do what we did before. Let's change the IDs to layout 4, and this is going to be below layout 3, and then the texts are 1 and 2 and 3, and this is going to be B plus, and the text is going to be a plus symbol. So let's check to see if this is displayed correctly, and as you could see, this is displayed correctly. And the last elements that we want to be printed are the 0 and the equal to. So I'm going to copy paste the linear layout, and I'm going to call this 5, and then this is going to be below 4. The weight sum is going to be 20 since we are going to have just 2 elements, and let's delete these 2 as we don't require them, and this is going to be B0, and the text displayed is going to be 0 as well, and this is going to be B equal, and the text that is going to be displayed is the equal to symbol. Let's check to see if it's displayed properly, and yes, and let's run this app one time to see if there are no problems in running the app on the emulator. As you could see, we have all the elements that we want displayed properly. Now these are just buttons and they won't perform anything. So we need to get the buttons inside the Java code and apply Onclick Listeners to the buttons so that they can do some kind of logic. I'm going to go into main activity. To simplify what's being performed on the main activity, I'm going to type in comments for us to better understand. So the step 1 is going to be creating fields here, and those fields are, we declare the variables, the buttons and the text views here. So that's what's called creating fields. And after that, step 2 is going to be finding the views by their IDs. We're going to assign the fields that we created to the views that we will find using the ID. And the next step is to set Onclick listeners to the buttons and making the logic work. So let's create the fields that are required. I'm going to first create the text view, and the text view that we created was TV display. And I'm pressing Alt Enter for it to import. And we created a lot of buttons, and I'm going to add the buttons one by one here. Let's create the functional buttons first, and the buttons are cancel, mod, divide, multiply, minus, plus, and then equal. So when I press Alt Enter, the button gets imported as well. And let's now create a separate field for the number buttons, which is starting from 0 all the way to 9. And now let's start finding the views by their IDs. To do that, I'm going to say TV display equals text view find by ID r.id.tv display, and we need to do this for all the buttons as well. And to do that, let's say b cancel equals button find view by ID r.id b cancel. Now let's copy this 7 times for the 7 functional buttons, and I'm going to copy each field and replace this one by one. Now we need to repeat the process for button 0 to 9 as well. To do that, let's create the button 0 first, and then we'll say button find view by ID r.id.b0, and we need to repeat this for all the other 9 buttons. I'm replacing the digit in the end so that it's easier instead of just copy pasting, and let's do this for the IDs as well. Now we need to add Onclick listeners for each of the buttons that we just created. To add an Onclick listener, we can do it this way: Onclick listener, and then click Alt Enter for us to create the Onclick listener, and do this for the buttons. But since we have multiple buttons, we're not going to do it this way. We're simply going to implement an Onclick listener here. And when you press Alt Enter, it asks you if you want to implement methods, and we're going to select the Onclick method, and the Onclick listener for all the buttons is implemented here. To differentiate between all the buttons, we're going to say switch view.getID, and this would return the ID. And if we add in the case for each button, let's add in r.id. First button is b cancel. Let's add in a default case as well. So whenever any of the buttons are clicked, this method gets called, the Onclick, and here we are switching the IDs based on the button, and according to the ID, the case gets called. So in this case, the b cancel gets called. And let's add in all the other cases as well. So now we added all the functional buttons. Let's add for our number buttons, and let's say case r.id.b0, and similarly have a break statement here. Now we've added all the buttons that we're using. Let's add in methods that can handle each case. I'm going to differentiate the methods by 2. I'm going to say a number gets clicked or a function gets clicked, and b cancel is going to be b cancel gets clicked, and then b equal is going to be equal gets clicked. So I'm going to add in the appropriate functions, and for the cancel I'm going to say cancel pressed, and when we press Alt Enter, a cancel pressed method gets created. And for the operator, I'm going to say operator pressed, and when I press Alt Enter, the method gets created as well. And I'm going to pass in a character and call the character as operator, and with that we can differentiate between the types of operator. And since this is mod, I'm going to pass in percentage. Notice that character has to be surrounded by single quotes, and similarly we're going to copy paste this to all the other operator cases. And here it's going to be divide, this is going to be multiply, and for minus and plus as well. Now we need to handle this separately, and I'm going to call this a method onEqual pressed, and when we press Alt Enter, the onEqual pressed method gets created, and we're going to create methods for the number buttons. And when I press Alt Enter, the number pressed button gets created, and I'm going to pass in the number so that we can handle each number press. So for 0, I'm going to pass in 0, and similarly for 1, I'm going to pass 1, and we're going to pass in each number according to its number case. We're going to leave the default as blank as we do not require anything to be done. And let's start filling in each of these functions. Now, when you look at the calculator app, you see as we start typing characters, a string is formed, and as we add in more numbers, the string grows. So we are going to store this value in a string, and I'm going to call this string as expression. So let's create a field called string expression, and I'm going to initialize the expression with 0, as we're going to have 0 as the default value. Now we need to add in the Onclick listeners for each button. To do that, we need to say bcancel.set Onclick listener to this. The Onclick listener that we get implemented here will be added to each button. And similarly, we need to copy this to all the operator buttons, and we need to replace it with the appropriate button. And we need to repeat the process for number buttons as well. Now we have added the Onclick listeners for the operator buttons as well as the number buttons, and now let's add in the methods. So whenever a number gets pressed, it is added to the expression. So let's say expression equals expression plus number. So this means that whenever a number is pressed, the number gets added to the expression and the expression gets the value of the new expression. We can shorthand this by saying that expression plus equals number, and we need to display that on the text view. So I'm going to say tvDisplay.setText expression, and let's see if this works fine. Now when we press numbers, it gets added to the string. Since we haven't set the Onclick listeners for the operator pressed, these won't work, but we can say that the number works. Now notice that there is a 0 that is getting added. We do not want that. We need to handle it somehow. The way that I'm going to handle it is, whenever a number gets pressed for the first time, the 0 will be eliminated and then the number would be added. And for all the other times, the number would be added directly. To handle that, we need a boolean. I'm going to create a boolean called first. And since it's going to be true, I'm going to initialize it as true. Now let's handle this here. If it is not the first time, I'm going to say if it's not first, we can add in the expression directly to the number that already exists. If it is the first time, we are going to say expression equals number. And since this is an integer and this is a string, we cannot add it directly. We need to convert this to a string. And we need to flip the boolean to be false here. This is because the first time it was true and we added the number in place of the expression. And then we need to make it false for this to get executed each consecutive time. And let's see if this works now. As you could see, the 0 was not added in front. This is what we wanted to achieve. Now let's create the functionality of the cancel button. So when the cancel gets pressed, we want the expression to be 0. And we are going to display the expression to the text view. And we are going to say that first equals true. That's because we have cancelled everything. And let's test this to see if this works. Let's type in some values. And when cancel gets pressed, yes, the text is set to 0 again, and we can test it multiple times to make sure this works. And yes, we have achieved this step. Now let's handle how an operator gets pressed. We are simply going to say expression equals expression plus operator. We're just going to add the expression to the operator, and this can be shorthanded as expression plus equals operator, and we're going to display this on the TV display. Now let's see if this works. Now, as you could see, the expressions can also be entered. Oh, I know there are edge cases to be handled, but all we needed was the expressions to be added. So there's one Onclick listener that we haven't implemented yet, which is the equal to sign. Let's start doing that. Now, for the equal to sign, we need to use a third-party library. So let's start using our first third-party library. To do that, I'm going to Gradle scripts and build.gradle, which is the app build.gradle, and I'm going to go to the dependencies section, type in compile, and we need it to be surrounded by single quotes, and say net.object hunter exp 4j 0.4.4, and when we press sync now, this third-party library would be added to the code and we can start importing it into the Android code. So the third-party library that I added was called the expression builder. So I'm going to create an expression from the library. Here you could see this is called as the expression. I'm going to call this exp equals new expression builder, and we're going to use the expression, the string that we used to build. And when we press Alt Enter, that gets imported. We're going to get the value from the expression, and the return type is double. Now double is similar to float and it returns decimal values, and we're going to say expression dot evaluate. Now let's display this on the TV display. We're going to say set text and answer. We cannot display double directly, so we need to convert it to string. Now let's run this to see if this works. Now let's give some simple function. I'm going to say 78 plus 2 equals 80, and since integer that we printed was double, there is default decimal point that is formed. So hit cancel. Let's type in 90 times 2, and that is going to be 180. Now if we add in some kind of weird statements, like these statements doesn't make any sense and the app crashes, this was done purposefully because the expression builder does not know what to do. It just crashes the app, and this is called as application not responding, or ANR, and this is pretty common in Android when we are starting to learn. Let's see how to handle this exception. We need to add in a try catch statement to try and catch that expression. Let's say catch. The exception in this case is an illegal argument exception, and we're going to try this and see if there are any exceptions. If there are any exceptions, then the catch statement would get executed. If they're not, it would just pass through. And what we're going to do in this exception is we're going to say TV display dot set text equals, we're going to display error, and we need to reset our expression. So let's run this to see if we have handled the exception properly. Let's test 89 times 96, and it's 8544. Let's give a weird expression, and now it says error. Previously it was crashing, and let's say 9 minus 6 equals 3.0. Now as you could see, we have built our first practical Android app, which is a calculator app. I hope you are now comfortable building your own applications with the basic concepts that we have learned so far. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to type in comments, and I would make sure that I answer all your questions. That's it for this tutorial. This is Alex Vijayaraj. Have a good one.